Marcus Thompson wasn't just another employee at Sterling Tech. He was the kind of person who made things happen. From the day he walked into the company 5 years ago, fresh out of college with a degree in computer science, Marcus had been a force to reckon with. He didn't just do his job. He went above and beyond, solving problems that others found impossible and coming up with ideas that pushed the company forward. His desk was always cluttered with notebooks filled with scribbles, half-finished algorithms, sketches of new software designs, or notes about how to improve existing systems. But despite the chaos on his desk, Marcus's mind was razor-sharp, and everyone knew it. At first, some of his co-workers were intimidated by him. How could someone so young be so good? But over time, they realized Marcus wasn't there to compete. He was there to contribute. He helped his teammates when they got stuck, shared credit for group projects, and even stayed late to assist junior employees who were struggling. People started calling him the fixer, because if something broke, or if a project seemed doomed, Marcus would step in and save the day. It wasn't long before his name became synonymous with excellence at Sterling Tech. But Marcus wasn't just respected for his technical skills. He also had this quiet confidence that drew people to him. He wasn't loud or boastful. Instead, he let his work speak for itself. And while he didn't seek attention, it found him anyway. His managers noticed. His peers admired him. Even clients mentioned him by name when giving feedback after big projects. Everyone agreed. Marcus was destined for greatness. That's why, when whispers began circulating around the office about a possible promotion, no one was surprised. Rumor had it that Marcus was being considered for a senior management role, a position that came with more responsibility, a higher salary, and a seat at the executive table. If chosen, Marcus would become one of the highest-ranking black executives in the company's history. For many, this felt like a milestone, not just for Marcus, but for the entire organization. After all, Sterling Tech prided itself on innovation, and promoting someone as talented as Marcus seemed like the logical next step, but not everyone saw it that way. Greg Hargrove, the head of Marcus's division, had other thoughts. On paper, Greg was exactly what you'd expect from a corporate leader, polished, articulate, and commanding. But beneath his carefully maintained exterior lay a man consumed by prejudice. To Greg, Marcus's success wasn't something to celebrate. It was something to resent. In private conversations, Greg often grumbled about diversity hires, taking jobs away from more qualified candidates. He rolled his eyes during meetings about inclusion initiatives and mocked them as PC nonsense. And though he kept these opinions hidden most of the time, they simmered just below the surface, waiting for an opportunity to boil over. Greg's disdain for Marcus wasn't entirely new. Over the years, he'd subtly tried to undermine Marcus's achievements, questioning his decisions in meetings or dismissing his ideas without giving them proper consideration. But now, with the possibility of Marcus moving into a leadership role, Greg's resentment reached a breaking point. The thought of answering to someone like Marcus, a black man, younger than him, and infinitely more capable, was unbearable. As far as Greg was concerned, Marcus didn't deserve the promotion no matter how hard he worked or how much he contributed. This wasn't just business, it was personal. For Marcus, none of this was obvious, at least not yet. He remained focused on his work, oblivious to the storm brewing behind closed doors. All he cared about was doing his best and proving himself worthy of the opportunities coming his way. Little did he know, his determination was about to collide head-on with Greg's bigotry, setting off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The email arrived on a Friday afternoon, just as Marcus was wrapping up his work for the week. It wasn't unusual for him to receive messages from HR. They often reached out to discuss performance reviews or team updates, but this one was different. The subject line read, "Congratulations on your promotion." Marcus's heart skipped a beat as he opened the email. Inside there was a formal letter detailing his new role, responsibilities, and compensation package. It was official. He had been promoted to senior management. Marcus couldn't help but smile as he read through the document. This wasn't just a promotion. It was validation of everything he'd worked so hard for over the years. He thought about his family, his parents who had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities they never had, and his younger sister, who looked up to him as her role model. He imagined their faces when he told them the news. For Marcus, this moment wasn't just about personal success. It was about proving that hard work and determination could break down barriers. Eager to share the news with his manager, Marcus printed out the letter and headed to Greg Hargrove's office. He knocked lightly on the door before stepping inside. Greg was seated behind his desk, scrolling through emails on his computer. Without looking up, he gestured for Marcus to sit down. Marcus took a deep breath and handed over the letter. "I wanted to talk to you about this," he said, his voice steady but tinged with excitement. Greg glanced at the paper in his hand, scanning the contents briefly. At first, his expression remained neutral, almost indifferent. But then something shifted. His lips curled into a faint sneer and his eyes narrowed slightly. Slowly, deliberately, Greg began tearing the letter apart. First, he ripped it in half. Then, he tore those halves into quarters, letting the pieces fall onto his desk, like confetti. Marcus froze, his mind struggling to process what was happening. "You don't belong in leadership roles," Greg muttered under his breath, his tone dripping with disdain. "People like you shouldn't get ahead of themselves." His words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. For a moment, all Marcus could do was stare at the shredded remains of the letter scattered across Greg's desk. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. Finally, Greg looked up, meeting Marcus's stunned gaze with cold indifference. "Nothing's final yet," he said sharply. "Don't go making plans based on rumors." Marcus left the office in a daze, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. He replayed the scene in his head over and over, trying to make sense of it. Had Greg really just destroyed his promotion letter? Was this some kind of twisted power play? Or was it something deeper, more insidious? As Marcus walked back to his desk, anger began to replace shock. He knew he deserved this promotion, not because of his race, but because of his skills, his dedication, and his track record of delivering results. What Greg had done wasn't just unfair, it was wrong. Determined to address the situation, Marcus decided to report the incident to Human Resources. He scheduled a meeting with an HR representative named Lisa, someone he'd always assumed was fair and approachable. When the day came, Marcus laid out everything that had happened: the torn-up letter, Greg's dismissive comments, and the clear bias behind his actions. He even brought along a copy of the original email from HR confirming the promotion, hoping it would serve as evidence. Lisa listened intently, nodding occasionally as Marcus spoke. When he finished, she paused for a moment before responding. "I understand why you're upset," she said cautiously. "But we need to be careful here. Greg is a senior executive, and accusing him of discrimination could have serious implications. Are you sure this isn't just a misunderstanding?" Her words caught Marcus off guard. A misunderstanding? How could ripping up a promotion letter and making racially charged remarks be misunderstood? Still, Marcus tried to stay calm. "It's not a misunderstanding," he insisted. "He literally tore up the letter in front of me and said I didn't belong in leadership. That's not okay." Lisa sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Look, Marcus, I'm not saying you're imagining things, but sometimes tensions run high, and people say things they don't mean. Why don't you try to work things out with Greg, directly? Maybe there's been a miscommunication." Marcus left the meeting feeling deflated. Instead of finding support, he felt like he was being gaslit. The very department responsible for protecting employees seemed unwilling, or unable, to hold Greg accountable. It was as if the system itself was designed to protect people like Greg, while leaving others to fend for themselves. Over the next few days, Marcus wrestled with what to do next. Part of him wanted to let it go, to chalk it up as a loss and move on. But another part of him refused to stay silent. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had ever been treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or background. If he didn't speak up now, who would? That's when Marcus decided to take matters into his own hands. He started documenting everything, every interaction with Greg, every email exchange, every comment made during meetings. He also reached out to former colleagues asking if they'd experienced similar treatment. To his surprise, several people came forward with stories of their own. One coworker recounted how Greg had passed her over for a project despite her qualifications, favoring a less experienced white employee instead. Another described how Greg had mocked his accent during a team meeting, reducing him to tears. Each story added another layer to the picture Marcus was building, a portrait of a toxic workplace culture enabled by leaders like Greg. Feeling more confident in his decision, Marcus reached out to an old friend, Rachel Kim, a journalist known for covering workplace discrimination cases. They met for coffee one evening, and Marcus shared everything: Greg's actions, HR's response, and the testimonies he'd gathered. Rachel listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. By the end of their conversation, she was convinced this was a story worth telling. Together, Marcus and Rachel began crafting an exposé that would shine a light on the systemic racism at Sterling Tech. They combed through documents, cross-referenced accounts, and pieced together a narrative that was both compelling and damning. For Marcus, it was a daunting task. He knew speaking out could cost him his job, his reputation, or worse. But he also knew it was the right thing to do. If exposing the truth meant creating change, then it was a risk worth taking. As they worked, late into the night, Marcus allowed himself a small moment of hope. Maybe this wouldn't just be about holding Greg accountable. Maybe it could spark something bigger, a movement toward fairness, equality, and justice. Whatever happened next, Marcus was ready. After all, he'd spent his entire life overcoming obstacles. This was just another challenge, and one he was determined to face head-on. Marcus and Rachel worked tirelessly over the next few weeks, piecing together a story that would expose the deep-rooted issues at Sterling Tech. They knew they had to be thorough. Every detail mattered. If their exposé was going to make an impact, it needed to be unshakable. Marcus spent hours poring over emails, performance reviews, and company policies, looking for anything that could serve as concrete evidence of discrimination. He also reached out to former employees who had left the company under mysterious circumstances, many of whom were eager to share their experiences. One former employee, Sarah, recounted how she'd been passed over for promotions repeatedly despite glowing reviews from her peers and supervisors. It felt like no matter how hard I worked, my race was always held against me, she told Marcus during a phone call. Another ex-employee, James, described being mocked for his accent by Greg in front of the entire team. He made jokes about how I pronounced certain words, and everyone laughed along with him, even though I could see some of them felt uncomfortable, James said. These stories painted a disturbing picture of a workplace where prejudice wasn't just tolerated, it was normalized. Rachel helped Marcus organize these testimonials into a coherent narrative. She encouraged him to include his own experience, the torn-up promotion letter, Greg's dismissive remarks, and HR's failure to act, but reminded him to keep the focus on the bigger issue: systemic racism within the company. This isn't just your story, she told him. It's a story about how companies like Sterling Tech allow bias to thrive unchecked. That's what people need to hear. As they finalized the article, Marcus couldn't help but feel nervous. What if no one cared? What if the public dismissed it as another case of corporate drama? These doubts lingered in the back of his mind, but Rachel reassured him. The truth has power, she said. Once people see this, they won't be able to ignore it. The article went live early one Monday morning, posted on a popular tech news website. Within minutes, it began gaining traction. By lunchtime, it had gone viral, sparking conversations across social media platforms. The headline alone, "Racist Manager Rips Up Black Employee's Promotion Letter at Sterling Tech," was enough to grab attention. But it was the content of the article that kept readers hooked. Rachel had written it in a way that was both factual and deeply human, weaving together Marcus's personal journey with the broader context of workplace discrimination. Comments poured in from all corners of the internet. Some praised Marcus for his courage, calling him a hero for speaking out. Others shared their own experiences of facing bias at work, thanking Marcus for giving them a voice. A handful of commenters defended Greg and Sterling Tech, accusing Marcus of exaggerating or playing the race card, but their voices were drowned out by the overwhelming support he received. The backlash against Sterling Tech was swift and severe. Investors grew uneasy, worried about the potential fallout from the scandal. Employees, both current and former, continued coming forward with their own stories, adding fuel to the fire. One senior executive admitted in an anonymous interview that Greg's behavior was an open secret within the company. "We all knew what kind of person he was," the executive said, "but nobody wanted to rock the boat." Meanwhile, Greg doubled down on his actions, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. In a hastily arranged press conference, he denied tearing up Marcus's promotion letter and accused Marcus of fabricating the story to advance his career. "This is nothing more than a smear campaign," Greg declared, his face flushed with anger. "I've always treated everyone equally regardless of their background." But his denial only made things worse. Video footage surfaced online showing Greg interacting with employees in ways that contradicted his claims. In one clip, he could be heard making derogatory remarks about a co-worker's cultural attire. In another, he dismissed a female employee's suggestion during a meeting, saying, "Let's stick to ideas that actually make sense." These videos spread like wildfire, further damaging Greg's credibility and tarnishing Sterling Tech's reputation. The company scrambled to respond, issuing a carefully worded statement condemning discrimination and promising to investigate the allegations. But the damage was already done. Public trust in Sterling Tech had eroded, and the stock price plummeted. Investors who had once been eager to partner with the company began pulling out, citing concerns about leadership and ethics. The $2.8 billion buyout deal that had been in the works for months suddenly seemed destined to collapse. For Marcus, watching the fallout unfold was surreal.
He hadn't expected the article to blow up the way it did, or for the consequences to be so immediate. At first, he worried about retaliation from Greg or higher-ups at the company. Would they try to silence him? Fire him? But as the days passed,
it became clear that Sterling Tech was too busy trying to save itself to focus on him. Despite the chaos, Marcus found himself feeling a strange sense of relief. For years, he'd carried the weight of Greg's prejudice and the frustration of seeing HR turn a blind eye. Now, finally, the truth was out there for everyone to see. It wasn't just about vindication, it was about accountability. People like Greg couldn't hide behind titles or authority anymore. Their actions had consequences and the world was watching. Still, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. Exposing the problem was one thing, fixing it was another. As the dust settled, he began thinking about what came next. How could he use this moment to create lasting change? Not just at Sterling Tech, but in workplaces everywhere. Ideas started forming in his mind, inspired by the outpouring of support he'd received from strangers around the globe. This wasn't just his victory, it was a collective one. And if he played his cards right, it could lead to something much bigger, a movement toward fairness, equality, and justice. As he sat at his desk late one night, scrolling through messages from people thanking him for speaking out, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. After all, he'd faced challenges before, and every single time he'd come out stronger. This was no different. In the weeks following the expose, Sterling Tech became a battleground of conflicting emotions and shifting loyalties. The company's leadership scrambled to address the growing crisis, issuing statements that sounded hollow even to their own ears. "We are committed to fostering an inclusive workplace," read one press release, though few believed it after years of turning a blind eye to Greg Hargrove's behavior. Employees whispered about the scandal in hallways and Slack channels, unsure whether to feel hopeful for change or cynical about performative promises. Greg, meanwhile, dug his heels in deeper. At first, he tried to defend himself publicly, insisting that Marcus had fabricated the story to gain sympathy and advance his career. But as more evidence surfaced, including video clips of his past comments and actions, his denials began to crumble. When Sterling Tech finally terminated his employment without severance, Greg lashed out in private. blaming Marcus for ruining his life. "He'll regret this," Greg muttered to anyone who would listen, though fewer people were willing to. "Stand by him now." Even some of his closest allies within the company distanced themselves, fearing association with his toxic reputation. For Marcus, the aftermath was bittersweet. On one hand, he felt vindicated. The truth had come out and Greg's actions were exposed for what they were: blatant discrimination rooted in prejudice. On the other hand, Marcus couldn't shake the sadness that came with knowing how deeply flawed the system really was. He thought about all the talented individuals who might have left Sterling Tech, or never joined in the first place, because of leaders like Greg. How many careers had been stifled? How many dreams crushed under the weight of bias? Despite the turmoil, offers began pouring in from rival tech companies eager to recruit Marcus. Some promised lucrative salaries and high-profile positions, hoping to capitalize on his newfound fame. Others framed their pitches as opportunities for him to lead diversity initiatives and drive meaningful change. But Marcus wasn't interested in jumping ship just yet. After years of fighting to prove himself at Sterling Tech, leaving now felt like letting Greg win, even if indirectly. Instead, Marcus decided to channel his energy into something bigger than himself. Inspired by the overwhelming support he'd received from strangers around the world, he founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to mentoring underrepresented professionals in STEM fields. He called it Pathways Forward, a nod to the idea that everyone deserves a fair shot at success regardless of their background. The mission was simple but powerful: provide resources, guidance, and advocacy for individuals who faced barriers similar to those Marcus had encountered throughout his career. To get the nonprofit off the ground, Marcus partnered with Rachel, Kim, the journalist who had helped bring his story to light. Together, they organized workshops, webinars, and networking events aimed at empowering marginalized communities. They also launched a scholarship program to help students from underserved backgrounds pursue degrees in technology-related fields. Word spread quickly, and soon Pathways Forward attracted volunteers, donors, and sponsors eager to support its cause. One of the most impactful aspects of the nonprofit was its focus on storytelling. Marcus understood the power of personal narratives, not just his own, but those of others who had faced discrimination and persevered. He created a platform where people could share their experiences anonymously or publicly, depending on their comfort level. These stories served as both inspiration and evidence of the systemic issues plaguing workplaces across industries. By amplifying these voices, Marcus hoped to spark broader conversations about equity and inclusion. As Pathways Forward gained momentum, Marcus found himself invited to speak at conferences, panel discussions, and corporate training sessions. Companies that had once ignored issues of diversity suddenly wanted to hear his perspective. Some genuinely sought advice on how to improve their cultures, others simply wanted to appear progressive. Either way, Marcus seized every opportunity to push for real change. He challenged executives to examine their biases, overhaul outdated policies, and hold themselves accountable for creating equitable environments. Back at Sterling Tech, the fallout from the scandal continued to unfold. The CEO resigned amid mounting pressure, citing health reasons but widely believed to be bowing to shareholder demands. Several other top executives followed suit, leaving the company in disarray. Without strong leadership, Sterling Tech struggled to regain stability. Investors remained wary, and key partnerships fell through. The $2.8 billion buyout deal officially collapsed, marking a devastating blow to the company's future prospects. For employees still at Sterling Tech, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. While some feared retaliation from remaining managers, others felt emboldened to speak up about their own experiences. A grassroots movement emerged, led by junior staff members determined to hold leadership accountable. They formed committees focused on diversity and inclusion, demanding transparency and action. Though progress was slow, the seeds of change had been planted. Marcus watched from afar as Sterling Tech grappled with its identity. Part of him wished he could stay and help rebuild the company, but another part knew he was needed elsewhere. His work with Pathways Forward gave him purpose, a chance to make a difference not just for himself, but for countless others facing similar challenges. Every email he received from a grateful mentee or every success story shared by a scholarship recipient reinforced his belief that this was where he belonged. By the end of the year, Marcus's life looked vastly different from what it had been before the scandal broke. Gone were the days of quietly enduring injustice at Sterling Tech. In their place stood a man determined to rewrite the rules, to create a world where talent and hard work mattered more than skin color or privilege. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when doubt crept in. Change, after all, takes time. But Marcus reminded himself why he started this journey in the first place, to ensure that no one else would have to face what he did. Looking back, Marcus realized that Greg's actions, while cruel, had inadvertently set him on a path to something greater. If Greg hadn't torn up that promotion letter, Marcus might have stayed at Sterling Tech, climbing the corporate ladder without ever questioning the system. Instead, he'd become a catalyst for transformation, using his pain to fuel progress. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, Marcus knew he wasn't alone. Thousands of people, from former co-workers to complete strangers, stood beside him, united in the fight for fairness and equality. Years passed, and Marcus Thompson's name became synonymous with resilience, justice, and the fight for equality. What had started as a personal battle against discrimination at Sterling Tech transformed into a nationwide movement that inspired countless individuals to challenge systemic inequities in their own lives. Pathways. Forward, Marcus's nonprofit organization, grew beyond his wildest dreams. It wasn't just a platform for mentorship anymore. It was a beacon of hope, a catalyst for change, and a testament to the power of collective action. The impact of Pathways Forward was felt far and wide. The scholarship program helped hundreds of students from underrepresented communities pursue degrees in STEM fields. Many of these scholars went on to secure internships and jobs at major tech companies, breaking down barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. One recipient, a young woman named Maya, credited Marcus with changing her life. Before I heard about Pathways Forward, I thought careers in tech were only for people who looked a certain way, she said during an interview. But Marcus showed me that my voice matters, and now I'm building apps that solve real-world problems. Workshops and networking events organized by the nonprofit also proved transformative. Attendees learned not only technical skills, but also how to navigate workplace challenges like bias, microaggressions, and imposter syndrome. These sessions often featured guest speakers, industry leaders, activists, and academics who shared insights and strategies for creating inclusive environments. For many participants, these gatherings were more than educational. They were empowering. They provided a sense of belonging, reminding attendees that they weren't alone in their struggles. Marcus himself became a sought-after speaker, traveling across the country to share his story. His talks were raw, honest, and deeply moving. He didn't shy away from discussing the pain he'd endured or the doubts he'd faced along the way. But he always ended on a hopeful note, urging audiences to believe in their ability to create change. The hardest moments can lead to the greatest opportunities, he would say. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Your presence is your power. His advocacy extended beyond speeches and workshops. Marcus collaborated with lawmakers to strengthen anti-discrimination laws and push for greater accountability in corporate settings. He testified before Congress, sharing data collected through Pathways Forward to highlight the ongoing disparities faced by marginalized groups in the workforce. His efforts contributed to the passage of several landmark bills aimed at promoting diversity and inclusion in industries historically dominated by privilege. Meanwhile, Sterling Tech continued to struggle in the wake of the scandal. Though the ID company implemented reforms, including mandatory bias training and revamped hiring practices, it struggled to regain public trust. Employees reported mixed results. Some praised the new initiatives, while others felt they were mere window dressing. The absence of strong leadership left the organization floundering, unable to reclaim its former glory. By the time Marcus stopped following the news about Sterling Tech, it had been acquired by a larger competitor, a shadow of its former self. Greg Hargrove, too, faded into obscurity. After losing his job at Sterling Tech, he attempted to rebuild his career, but few companies were willing to take a chance on him. Rumors circulated that he had moved out of state, working odd jobs to make ends meet. While some might have pitied him, Marcus chose not to dwell on Greg's downfall. To him, Greg represented something larger than one man's prejudice. He symbolized the systems and attitudes that needed to be dismantled. Focusing on Greg's fate wouldn't bring meaningful change. Focusing on the future would. As the years went by, Marcus reflected on his journey often. There were moments when he wondered what his life might have been like if Greg hadn't torn up that promotion letter. Would he still be at Sterling Tech, climbing the corporate ladder and ignoring the cracks in the system? Or would he have found another way to channel his frustration into action? Ultimately, he realized that the question didn't matter. What mattered was what he had done with the situation he'd been given. One evening, as he sat in his home office surrounded by awards, letters of gratitude, and photos of smiling mentees, Marcus thought back to the day everything changed. He remembered the shock, the anger, and the fear that had coursed through him when Greg ripped up the letter. But he also remembered the determination that followed, the decision to fight not just for himself, but for everyone who deserved better. That moment, painful as it was, had shaped the rest of his life. When asked in interviews about his legacy, Marcus often smiled wistfully. "I don't think about legacies," he would say. "I think about impact. If even one person feels empowered to speak up because of what I've done, then it's all worth it." And indeed, his impact was undeniable. From the young engineers launching startups to the seasoned professionals advocating for policy changes, Marcus's influence rippled outward, touching lives in ways he could never have imagined. In quieter moments, Marcus allowed himself to dream about the future. He envisioned a world where workplaces truly reflected the diversity of society, a world where no one had to fight for a seat at the table because the table itself was built differently. He knew such a vision wouldn't come easily. There would always be resistance, setbacks, and battles yet to be fought. But he also knew that progress was possible. One step, one story, one act of courage at a time. And so, Marcus Thompson's journey became more than just a tale of personal triumph. It was a reminder that adversity, when met with resilience, can spark transformation. It was proof that speaking truth to power isn't just an act of defiance, it's an act of creation. Most importantly, it was a call to action, urging others to join the fight for fairness and equality. For Marcus, the hardest moment of his life had led to the greatest opportunity, not just for himself, but for generations to come. And as he looked toward the horizon, he knew the work was far from over. But he was ready. After all, he'd spent his entire life overcoming obstacles. This was simply the next chapter in a story that was still being written.